everyone. So, you've probably heard that Joe Kent has resigned as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And he handed in a resignation letter where he said that the reason he's resigning is because he is standing on principle because he's opposed to the war with Iran that Israel dragged America into, manipulated and deceived President Trump into. So we're going to get into that issue in this video. And very important, this video also relates to the story surrounding my relationship with Charlie Kirk and the death of Charlie Kirk and the conspiracy theories of Candace Owens, because Joe Kent actually played a role in this that I have never talked about publicly, and I'm going to talk about in this video. So stick around for that. That's coming later on in the video. I'm going to say some stuff here that I've never said before in public in any forum. But before we get into all of that, please make sure to go to Israel365charity.com. Israel365charity.com and support our Israel Under Fire campaign. We're helping families dealing with a whole range of issues that are resulting from the attacks coming from Iran. Israel 365 is tied in with a lot of charities on the ground, and your money will go into the right hands. And it's a great way for you to help out on the Israeli home front. So we're going to start this video with a clip from Glenn Beck talking about Joe Kent just yesterday. Here's Glenn Beck.
Joe Kent is not some random bureaucrat. He is and should be honored as such, but it doesn't give you blanket immunity from questioning. He is a decorated veteran, a war hero, former Special Forces, CIA officer, two-time congressional candidate, and also a man long identified with American First, an anti-interventionist wing of the right. He is a much more of a libertarian, okay? He's also been controversial for his association with, far-right figures, talking about the election and January 6th and everything else. And so that's why the left has given him lots and lots of criticism as a conspiracy theorist, et cetera, et cetera. So the public, the American public, have two truths to look at him, okay? He's a serious combat veteran, deep resume. He's also spent years moving in circles where grievance and extremism and ideological drift are also visible. Now, I wouldn't normally bring this up, but he's got something else I'm going to bring up here in a second that is important to say, that ideological drift, okay? He has a deep tragedy in the center of his life, and that is absolutely real. His first wife, Shannon Kent, highly decorated Navy cryptologic technician. She was killed in, I think, 2019. An ISIS suicide bomber came into Syria, blew himself up, and that was during Operation Inherent Resolve. Official Navy and NSA memorial materials describe her as, killed in the line of duty. ISIS claimed responsibility for that attack. Now he has a new wife. And this is important. And normally I would not get into, somebody's wife unless it's an influencing factor and there is something that is very different about the wife. Okay. His current wife, multiple reports identify her as Heather Kaiser and say that she has contributed to something called the Greystone. This is an outlet, a media outlet, founded by Max Blumenthal. Who's Max Blumenthal? What is this outlet? Blumenthal wrote for something called Al-Akbar. That is a pro-Hezbollah, pro-Assad outlet. Now, he resigned in 2012 over the Syria coverage, but he's also a contributor to Russian state media, RT, and Al Jazeera, which is Qatari money. The Gray Zone, which he edits, has been criticized as anti-West, anti-Israel, pro-Russia, pro-Iran. Also, he was platformed at an Alexander Dugin-linked event. If you've listened to this show, I've been talking about Alexander Dugin and how dangerous this guy is since before the turn of the century. I first found him when he said that America would break up into 10 different zones and they were trying to create a civil war in America. And that was like That was like 1997 or 8. Started talking about him. He is very, very dangerous. Okay. This event called the Forum of the Future 2050 was in Moscow in 2025. And that's where Blumenthal spoke on the same stage with Alexander Dugin. Now, I want you to know, crimes of the wife are not crimes of the husband. There's no crime with his wife, but it's a saying. But I learned a very important lesson in my big fat Greek wedding, and that is the man may be the head, but the wife is the neck, and she turns the head. And anybody who is married knows, you know, if your wife is on a path, dude, you got a choice, okay? Now, I don't find any solid reporting that proves that she's an employee of Blumenthal, in the formal sense. But she did write for the site. So I don't know any deeper than that. Those connections are being argued online, but the evidence available does not support she is a Dugin puppet or a supporter of the Red-Green Alliance as established fact. However, you can draw an inference from that, but that's not fact. That said, the ideological ecosystem that he is in and his wife is in, it is curious to me that he has taken a 180-degree turn after they got together. And very, very recently, let me just go back to 2020. He tweeted in 2020, "We should not sit and wait for the next attack. Wipe Iran's ballistic capability out." Another one. "I personally think we should have crushed their ballistic and nuclear capability, but Trump has a plan, and he has earned the trust of any clear-eyed observer." So he wanted to go further at that time. Why the change? Could it be the influence of Duginites?
Okay, so that's Glenn. So let me just flesh this out a little bit. So he resigned, right? He resigned 2 days ago as director of National Counterterrorism Center, this guy, Joe Kent. And in his letter of resignation, he claimed that he could not, quote, he could not in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. He insisted that Iran was not an imminent threat to the U.S. He said that in the letter. And here's the thing. He said that President Trump had been, quote, deceived by high-ranking Israeli officials who pressured him to attack Iran. In his resignation letter, he also accused Israel of dragging the United States into the Iraq war. Now, what he wants you to believe is that Israel somehow deceived the entire U.S. national security apparatus, the CIA, the NSA, the DHS, the Joint Chiefs, the Department of War, the State Department, and the president. And he, Joe Kent, knew the truth, right? Offering no explanation of the tactics or the fabricated intelligence that he's claiming. Okay, so top U.S. officials since his resignation have confirmed that Kent was a known leaker in the administration and was under investigation, and that he was not privy to the intelligence briefings leading up to this war or the war planning. Okay, which also raises serious questions about his claims about what led to this war. So Joe Kent is accusing Israel of pressuring Trump to attack Iran. He's also ignoring the fact that the Washington Post reported that Saudi Arabia was also urging the president to attack Iran. Right? We now know that. So did Saudi Arabia drag America into war? Look, and as Glenn pointed out there, his own tweets in 2020, he called out for wiping out Iran's nuclear and ballistic capabilities. He also himself cited over 150 proxy attacks on U.S. troops and warned of the assassination plots against President Trump, which was an Iranian plot. And now he's claiming that Iran posed no imminent danger. Okay, he himself made the case that it was an urgent threat years ago. Now, President Trump, for his part, has said that Kent was very weak on security, and said, yes, Iran did pose an imminent threat. President Trump just said a couple days into the war that he would have forced Israel's hand to strike Iran. Secretary of State Rubio confirmed the danger. Even Witkoff, who always wants peace and negotiations, Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff said that Iranian officials boasted of having advanced nuclear capabilities and evading, meaning advanced in their program, and that they were evading the monitoring. Okay, Mike Johnson, the speaker, said that Kent wasn't in the briefings. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, called the idea that the president acted at Israel's behest laughable. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, even if you know who Trump is. His claim that U.S. military action would rally Iranian public opinion around the regime, which is another thing that he claimed, that Joe Kent claimed, is ridiculous. The Iranian regime slaughtered tens of thousands of their people. The people in Iran hate the regime. And also the fact that he claimed that Israel caused the Iraq war is ridiculous. Senior Israeli officials at the time warned the U.S. that invading Iraq would destabilize the region and strengthen Iran. And Israel at the time just agreed with the U.S. and British intelligence on Saddam Hussein's nuclear program rather than originating it. This doesn't come from Israel. This is all well documented. So what Joe Kent is trafficking in here, this, Israel controls the U.S. government stuff. That's what he's trafficking. That's what he's talking about here. Okay, that's Joe Kent. This idea that Israel has outsized influence in Washington. This is a very pervasive idea in that corner of the right, in the anti-Israel and more isolationist corner of the right that Joe Kent is very much a part of. And here's where I want to get into something. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I'm going to talk a little bit about Charlie Kirk. So let's start with a clip of Joe Kent being interviewed by Tucker Carlson. This was just released. And he's talking here about Charlie. Okay, let's take a look at this clip.
So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis, and then he's suddenly publicly assassinated and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that, it's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into, but there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
no, I don't think you are.
Because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public, that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran.
Okay. So here's Joe Kent basically giving credence, endorsing this theory, this conspiracy theory about the Israelis being involved in the death of Charlie Kirk, which is, and the reason that the FBI shut it down is because it's ridiculous. Charlie was very famously, very publicly anti-trans, and the guy who shot him was part of that community. I mean, and there's no evidence whatsoever for these, and it's also absurd on so many counts. Charlie was, for all of his criticisms, and he did have criticisms for Israel, especially around the Iran war in June. I'll get into that more in a moment because I was involved in conversations with Charlie on a daily basis about that. So Charlie definitely was opposed to American involvement in the 12-day war, very much so. But what I want to focus on is Joe Kent saying there that we know that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from Jewish donors because of the text messages that were made public. Okay, and famously, the text messages he's talking about is that Charlie sent some text messages the day before he was murdered. Actually, it turned out but we texted every day. I mean, he sent text messages to a group of people. I was part of that group, a group of 9 people. It was a chat group, a WhatsApp chat group that Charlie put together to discuss issues that relate to Israel and also relate to Sharia and Islam and related issues, but mainly to focus on the Israel issue. And Charlie would have questions. He'd ask them if an incident happened in the news that related to Israel. He would work out. He would talk about what his position would be. He would seek information. The reason I was in the group, everyone else in the group was in America. I'm the only one who was in Israel, and that's why I was in the group. I'm very plugged into what's going on here. I'm knowledgeable in terms of the political situation. I'm also a person of faith, and I understand. And I have a long career of working with American Christians, and also an involvement in the America First MAGA movement, and I understand that world. And Charlie already knew me. We had met a couple of years earlier, So, and I go to Turning Point every year, and I'm a regular on Steve Bannon's show, and Steve and Charlie were very close. So I was in Charlie's orbit, and that's why I was included in that WhatsApp chat. Candace likes to talk about me lately and say, "Oh, what was it? This rabbi from Israel." She has no idea who. I guess she has no idea who I am, and why it made sense for Charlie to be consulting with me on Israel. In any event, so I was one of the recipients of these text messages. So here's the screenshot, the famous screenshot that Candace publicized on her show, and here Charlie writes, "Just lost another huge Jewish donor, $2 million a year because we won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Candace." So Charlie was very frustrated. He had a Jewish donor who pulled out. He was someone who gave him $2 million a year, and the guy pulled out. And Charlie thought of it as being bullied. He says, "I won't be bullied like this." And then someone responds in the group, "Please don't invite Candace. This won't be good." Charlie was, he was getting kind of upset. And anyway, that's what was going on there. And Charlie, of course, didn't invite Candace. He wasn't, he didn't do anything about that. But he was upset about this. And then later that evening, we had a Zoom call where we talked about Israel issues in preparation for his going out on his campus tour. He had asked, his people had sent me a list of questions to prepare answers for, to give Charlie, to go over the talking points from Israel's perspective. Some of them Charlie accepted, some of them he didn't. We had a conversation, and that Zoom call's been made public. You've heard about that probably as well if you've been following this story. The reason I bring this up is that Joe Kent said in that interview with Tucker Carlson that these text messages were made public. How were they made public? Who made them public? Oh, Candace Owens. How did Candace Owens get those text messages? Where did she get them from? She wasn't in the group. You know how she got them? Well, Andrew Colvett, who was Charlie's number two, he was Charlie's producer and his partner in crime and everything that he did. I don't mean crime, partner in TPUSA. He's the host of the Charlie Kirk show now. Andrew was in the group, and Andrew said already publicly that he gave screenshots of these text messages to someone in the government. Now I know, and also from Joe Kent's interview, but we also knew from before that Charlie was good friends with Joe Kent. Part of this young America First leadership, Joe was part of that group. And Charlie would go to Washington frequently, especially during that time period, as Joe indicated, that he was lobbying President Trump to keep America out of that war. He was. But Charlie, every time he went to Washington, every time Charlie would make one of those quick visits to Washington, he would come back with believing more and more that Israel was actually controlling the U.S. government, or that Israel had too much power. I shouldn't say that. Charlie would come back with more of a belief that Israel had too much power in Washington. You got to remember that in May, just a couple months before all this, Charlie had written a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu, which has been made public, professing his support for the state of Israel, and that he said he considered it one of the honors of his life to support Israel, and suggesting ways that Israel could improve its public face, its messaging. Charlie was very supportive of Israel, but he had his criticisms. But I'm going to be perfectly honest. In those months leading up to his assassination, he was wavering on certain issues. He wasn't happy about the Iran war, but his approach to the Iran war, he said it publicly on his show, on Jesse Waters, on Fox. He said it repeatedly. His approach was, I don't like this, but I trust Trump. That was Charlie's approach. I trust Trump. He's earned our trust. And then when everything went well with Midnight Hammer, Charlie said, look, it was good. It didn't escalate out of control. Great. But it was Joe Kent. It was Joe Kent who sent those text messages to Candace. I'm telling you this now. I'm not going to say how exactly I know. There's a warning of an incoming missile. That's not an air raid siren, but it could mean that in the next minute or two, I'll get an air raid siren. So then I'll have to stop this video. But I'm not going to say how I know this. It doesn't matter how I know this, but I'm telling you definitively, it was Joe Kent who sent those that screenshot to Candace. But not only that, he also sent her a screenshot of all of the participants in that chat group. That means that Candace knew the identities of the people in that chat group. And she's a media person. She's a podcaster, famously anti-Israel one. Why is Joe Kent in the White House as the director, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, sending screenshots of text messages, even if he wants to leave no stone unturned and he wants to go down that rabbit hole of the Israel supporters and the assassination of Charlie Kirk? Even if he wants to do that, why is he sending those text messages to Candace? And I'm telling you, he sent them to her. So when he says in that interview with Tucker Carlson, they were made public, who made them public, Joe? Joe made them public. So when they say that he's a notorious leaker, he's a notorious leaker. He's also someone who has gone down the rabbit hole of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That's where Joe Kent is. And I think that the people in the administration figured that out. And that's why they started investigating him. And now he resigns because he's standing on principle against this war with Iran, married to someone who worked for Max Blumenthal, wrote for Gray Zone, a pro-Iran, pro-Russia, anti-American outlet. That's who he's married to. So this whole thing stinks to high hell. But I'm just going to say very frankly, Charlie had his ups and downs in his relationship with Israel. Some days he had his criticisms. He was still supportive. He also believed increasingly in those final months that Israel had too much influence in Washington. And where was he getting it from? I have every reason to believe that he was getting it from Joe Kent, his good friend Joe Kent. And that's why Andrew Kolva was also friends with Joe, because Joe was part of their circle. And that's why he was the person that Andrew shared the text messages with. So Andrew shared them with Joe. Joe then shared them with Candace. The notorious leaker leaked. And then he goes on Tucker and says, they were made public. Yeah, whatever. That's Joe Kent for you. So please share this video. Maybe some of the conspiracy theorists will find it interesting. Maybe they'll use it as another data point in their wild theories. But please like, subscribe, share, and do all that great stuff. And thank you again. I'm so grateful for the growth of this channel. This audience is really growing. And I really believe that we're building something very special here. So thanks for watching. God bless.